I'm Emma Carter. I'm 34 years old, a corporate compliance director in Dallas. And looking back, I realize I should have seen it coming. My brother always did whatever it took to win, no matter who he crushed along the way. My job is built around rules, ethics, quiet fixes that no one notices except when I make mistakes. I've always been the one smoothing things over, the family diplomat. I'd send birthday cards even when I was angry. I'd call Mom every Sunday no matter how busy work got. I believed in keeping the family together even when it was splitting at the seams. Growing up, my older brother Mark was the golden boy, charming, sharp-tongued, able to talk anyone into anything. He had this way of making you feel like you owed him something. He liked control. He liked the upper hand. I left home at 22 to build my own life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. I liked knowing where the lines were drawn. I thought everyone in my family valued those same lines. That was my mistake. Our parents, Linda and George, spent 40 years in the same modest house. A creaky colonial with peeling shutters and the comforting smell of lemon polish. It was their safe place. Our safe place. I thought it would always be there for them. When Mom called me one morning, her voice shaking, I didn't yet know what Mark had pulled, but I could guess. And even before she got the words out, I felt a cold certainty settling in my chest. I'd always kept the peace, but I knew then I wasn't going to this time. My parents were the kind of people who made do. Mom clipped coupons until the ink wore off the paper. Dad fixed the furnace himself every winter. Their house wasn't grand, but it was theirs, 40 years of mortgage payments, scraped together repairs, and memories packed into every corner. They'd always planned to leave it to us. It was supposed to be the family's anchor, a place my own kids would one day visit, running up and down those narrow stairs, just like Mark and I once did. But Mark saw things differently. He was always the favorite, though Mom and Dad would have denied it if you asked them outright. When he got into business school, they dipped into their retirement savings to help. When I needed tuition money for my master's, they told me they couldn't afford it. I didn't resent it back then. I figured he was the one who'd take care of them someday. But after Dad's mild stroke last year, things shifted. Mark started managing their bills to help out. He offered to handle their property taxes. He said he'd streamline their finances so they wouldn't have to worry. They trusted him completely. Even when I questioned it, when I asked Mom if she'd seen the paperwork, she'd shush me. Don't be ungrateful. Your brother is helping. I let it go. I was busy with work, and part of me wanted to believe they were right. After all, he was family. But Mark wasn't helping them out of love. He was helping himself to control. He began dropping hints about monetizing assets and unlocking equity, like he was their financial advisor. He'd say things like, "You can't expect to live there forever," while smirking behind his wine glass. Mom brushed it off. Dad grew quieter. There was an unspoken fear in the house that if they argued, he'd cut them off completely. When I visited for Christmas, I noticed unopened mail stacked in the hall. Late notices, letters from the county. Mark brushed it all off, saying it was handled. It wasn't, but even then, I didn't see the full picture. I thought he was careless, maybe greedy, but not cruel enough to pull the rug out from under them completely. That illusion didn't last much longer. Because when Mom called that morning, shaking and crying, I realized he hadn't just been managing their finances. He'd been maneuvering them out of their own home. He didn't see them as parents anymore, just an obstacle in his way. It started with a letter, a formal, cold notice posted on their front door while they were out buying groceries. It used legal language, notice to vacate, renovations required. Possession within 30 days. Mom found it first. She didn't even understand what it meant at first. She thought it was a mistake. Mark didn't answer her calls for 2 days. When he finally picked up, he acted surprised, said it was just a formality so he could get city permits for the updates he wanted to do for them. Told her not to worry, he had it under control. Mom believed him. Dad didn't. He didn't say it aloud, he just folded the letter, put it in his wallet, and stopped talking for hours at a time. I'd never seen him so quiet. Mark stopped coming by. No dinners, no check-ins. He'd been practically living there before, always helping, always managing. Suddenly he was too busy. When Mom asked him about the renovations, he told her vaguely about plans for new siding, a new roof, but there was no contractor, no plans filed with the city. She asked if they should pack anything. He said yes, just in case, and then didn't call again. 30 days passed. An agent showed up with a clipboard and an apologetic smile, saying they were required to leave that day. The house had officially transferred into Mark's LLC for improvements, and any dispute would have to go through civil court. Mom panicked. She called me at work, crying so hard I could barely make out her words. I told her to calm down, to put the agent on the phone, but it was too late. He'd already handed them a printed sheet about tenant resources and left. They had to go. They packed in 3 hours, old clothes, family photos, my father's medication. They left behind furniture they couldn't carry, books Dad loved, Mom's cherished kitchen mixer. They didn't have anywhere to go. Mark didn't answer. I took them in that night. I remember opening the door and seeing Mom clutching a cardboard box like it was a lifeline. Dad's eyes were red, but he didn't say anything. He just sat down in my hallway and buried his head in his hands. I made them tea, trying to keep my voice calm, even as my hands shook. When I finally got Mark on the phone, he sounded annoyed. "You're overreacting," he said. "They had to move so I can fix it up. It's not my fault they're being dramatic." I asked when they could go back. He hesitated, then laughed. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe never. I haven't decided." It was then I realized there was no renovation, no plan. He just wanted the house. It was an asset to him, a chance to cash out, flip it, leverage it for something bigger. He didn't see Mom and Dad as people to protect, just liabilities to clear off the books. I listened to him ramble about property values while my parents sat in my living room, homeless in their 60s, looking small and defeated. Something in me snapped. I didn't yell at him. I didn't threaten him. I just listened quietly until he hung up. Then I turned to my parents. I remember Dad looking up at me, voice cracking as he asked, "Where do we go now?" That's the moment I decided I was going to get their house back. And if Mark thought I was too soft, too careful to do it, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. Those first nights with them in my apartment were the hardest. My mother, who used to hum while making dinner, sat in silence at my table. She'd stir her tea without drinking it, eyes fixed on nothing. Dad was even worse. He'd always been proud, almost stubborn about taking help. Now he just stared at the floor, shoulders slumped, mumbling apologies under his breath. I tried to keep things normal. I made dinner, offered them my bed while I took the couch, pretended this was temporary. But they weren't fooled. They felt like burdens in their own daughter's home. And I hated Mark for that. The worst part was how calm he was about it. When I texted, he replied with dismissive, clipped answers. He told me they needed to move on, that they'd get over it eventually. "They don't need a house that big," he wrote once. "It's inefficient." I nearly threw my phone across the room. I tried talking to Mom. She shook her head. "Don't fight with him," she whispered. "He's still your brother." Dad didn't say anything, but when I offered to help him move boxes into my storage unit, he lost his grip and collapsed into tears. "This was supposed to be our home," he sobbed. "I built that fence with my own hands." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the county property records. Mark's LLC name sat there in black and white. He hadn't even bothered to hide it. He'd filed the transfer paperwork a month before he gave them the eviction notice. He'd planned it. Every helpful payment he made, every bill he managed, every time he told them not to worry about reading the fine print. I felt sick, but I kept reading. I started pulling tax records, sale histories, state business filings. I wanted to see every lie laid out in legal language. And the more I read, the more I understood. Mark didn't just want money, he wanted power. He wanted to prove he was smarter than everyone else, even our parents. It was a game to him. He was betting I wouldn't do anything, that I'd be too polite, too conflict-averse, too good to fight back. That's when I stopped crying. I went to bed with a plan forming in my head. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I drove my parents to a diner for breakfast and tried to make them eat something. Then I dropped them at a local senior center to talk to a counselor about housing resources because even though I had them with me for now, they deserved a real plan. And I drove straight to a lawyer's office. I wasn't going to scream or beg. I wasn't going to stoop to Mark's level, but I was going to beat him. On paper, in court if I had to, or even better, at his own game. I remember sitting in that lawyer's chair, hands clasped in my lap, voice calm but shaking with rage. I need to know every legal way I can undo what my brother did, I said. The lawyer blinked, then nodded. Good, she said, because there might be a way. The lawyer's name was Julia. She was direct, no nonsense, the kind of person who didn't flinch when I laid out everything. I handed her the folder I'd printed with property transfers, county tax notices, emails between Mark and my parents. She flipped through it in silence, eyebrows rising. He set up the LLC in advance, she said finally. Your parents didn't realize they signed over their share? They trusted him, I said flatly. Julia exhaled. It's ugly, but it's not necessarily airtight. Your parents are on the original deed. They may have been coerced or misled. That gives us leverage. She explained how we could challenge the transfer in court, but litigation could take years. It would drain my parents' savings and mine. Then she paused. Or, she said slowly, you could buy him out. I frowned. He won't sell. Julia smiled thinly. Everyone has a price, and you don't have to let him see you coming. That idea stuck in my head all the way home. I spent that night crunching numbers on my living room floor while my parents slept in my bed. My savings weren't enough, not even close. But I had equity in my own condo, a decent credit score, a small investor group I'd worked with once on a side project. I called them the next day. I told them I needed bridge financing and I was willing to pay interest. They asked what for. Family matter, I said. Within a week, I'd lined up the money, enough to make an offer Mark couldn't easily dismiss, even if it was below market value. Meanwhile, I went back to Julia. We drafted a letter of intent to buy. Formal, legal, unambiguous. Mark wouldn't see it coming. He thought I was too nice, that I'd stay out of it. So I played the part. I stopped arguing with him over text. I stopped threatening lawyers. I sent casual messages asking how he was doing. I said Mom and Dad were settling in with me. He got smug again, told me I should thank him for forcing them to move, that they'd have died in that old house if he hadn't intervened. I smiled at my phone. Then I sent Julia the green light to proceed. In private, I kept Mom and Dad out of it. They were too hurt, too exhausted. Mom asked why I was always on the phone, why I was meeting work people so often. I lied. Just busy season, I said. But inside, I was keeping score. Every sleepless night they spent on my couch. Every time Dad apologized for being there. Every time Mom cried over a recipe she couldn't cook without her old stove. I wrote it all down, a ledger of debts Mark didn't know he owed, and I planned to collect every last one. Once the financing was secure, everything became a waiting game. Mark didn't know I had the money lined up. He didn't know I had a lawyer ready to file suit if he refused to talk. I stayed silent. I let him think he'd won. He posted pictures on social media of dinners out, new suits, fancy cocktails. Always captioned with things like closing deals or winning. It made me sick to look at them. But I forced myself too. I wanted to see how confident he was, how blind. Meanwhile, Julia filed quiet paperwork with the county signaling our interest in buying the property. Nothing public enough to tip him off, just enough to tie up his options if he tried to sell to anyone else. She also sent him a letter of intent, polite, formal, A real offer at market value. He ignored it at first, so I waited. And while I waited, I made sure my parents were okay. I got them a small one-bedroom sublet for the time being so they wouldn't have to stay on my couch. I told them it was just until things settled down. They believed me. They didn't know I was already negotiating to buy back their home. Mark finally called me about 3 weeks later. "You're serious about this offer?" he said, sounding amused. "Yes," I said calmly. "You can't afford it," he taunted. "I can," I said. He paused. He didn't expect that. I could hear the wheels turning. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I just let the silence stretch, the tension thicken. He finally told me he'd think about it. That's when I knew I had him. He wasn't laughing anymore, but I didn't rush him. I wanted him to stew in it. Julia and I kept everything official. Emails, contracts, nothing personal, no emotional leverage he could twist. If he refused, we were ready to sue for fraudulent transfer on behalf of our parents. Julia had the drafts ready to file, but I didn't want a court battle. I wanted him to sell, to admit defeat, to sign the papers himself. So I stayed quiet. I stayed polite. And behind the scenes, I watched every door he tried to open close in his face. His LLC couldn't get a better buyer. He couldn't flip it without clearing title issues. He was cornered, and he knew it. He finally agreed to meet in person. We sat in a conference room at Julia's office. Neutral ground, no shouting aloud, just contracts and signatures. Mark swaggered in late in an expensive blazer, pretending to check his phone like this was beneath him. But I saw the worry in his eyes. He tried small talk, asked about work, smirked when I said I was still in compliance. "Always the rule follower," he said. I nodded. "That's why I'm here." Julia slid the purchase contract across the table. Mark glanced at it, then laughed. "You really scraped this together?" I didn't answer. He picked at the numbers, tried to negotiate. Julia shut him down every time, calm, precise. She reminded him he'd already signaled acceptance of market value. He scoffed. "You really think you're beating me? I'm still getting paid." I folded my hands. "Take the deal, Mark." He leaned back, watching me. "What if I don't?" Julia answered before I could. "Then we file fraudulent transfer claims, court orders. Your other buyers will run the second they see it." He went quiet. I watched him realize he was trapped. The room felt cold. The air seemed thinner. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me, like he was seeing a stranger in his sister's face. "You're serious," he said quietly. I nodded. "Completely." There was no screaming, no dramatic threats, just silence as he picked up the pen. I watched his hand tremble. He signed. Julia notarized it. She handed me the copies. Mark didn't look at me as he left. He just walked out, his phone already at his ear, trying to salvage whatever dignity he had left. I sat there a moment longer, breathing slowly. It was done. The wire transfer cleared 3 days later. The deed was mine. I didn't tell my parents right away. I wanted to do it properly. I picked them up one Saturday morning with coffee and muffins, told them we were going for a drive. Mom was suspicious. "Emma, what is this about?" Dad sat in the back seat, staring out the window, quiet like he'd been for weeks. When I turned onto their old street, Mom's breath hitched. The house looked the same. The grass was overgrown, but the shutters were still that faded green she'd always loved. I parked in the driveway and handed her a small envelope. Inside was the deed. Her name. Dad's name. She read it once, then again, her hands shaking. "I don't understand," she whispered. "It's yours," I said. "I bought it back." Dad didn't move at first. Then he let out a shuddering breath, covering his eyes with one hand. Mom started crying in these quiet, gasping sobs. I didn't hug them right away. I just let them have the moment. Finally, Dad opened the door and stepped onto the driveway. He looked at the house like he was seeing it for the first time. "I thought it was gone," he said hoarsely. "It's home," I said. He turned to me, eyes wet. "You did this?" I nodded. He pulled me into the tightest hug of my life. Mom joined us, both of them holding me like they'd never let go. In that moment, it was like every fight, every betrayal, every heartbreak had led here, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could really breathe. We spent the next few days cleaning the house together. Mom wiped every cabinet like she was blessing it. Dad replaced a cracked tile in the hallway even though no one would notice. I painted over the scuffs on the door frame where Mark and I used to measure our heights. It wasn't about fixing the house, it was about reclaiming it. I didn't say anything to Mark after that. I didn't need to. He got his money, he moved on. But he lost the thing he really wanted, the power to decide where they belonged. Now that choice was theirs again. Mom put her favorite quilt on their old bed. Dad sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise. I didn't tell them how hard it was or what it cost. They didn't need to know. It was enough that they were home. And as I locked the door behind me one evening, listening to their laughter drift through the hallway, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I know not everyone gets to fight back like this, but I wasn't going to let my parents lose everything they'd built, not without a fight, not to their own son. Family isn't supposed to betray you, but if they do, you have to decide what you're willing to do to make it right. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I just outplayed him. And I'd do it again. If you've ever watched someone try to steal what your family deserves, don't stay silent. Hit like, share your story in the comments. Let them know they're not alone. We can fight back.